Good morning. How is everyone?
Very well, thanks. Good morning.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. So today we've all congregated to talk about what makes best practice in build to rent customer engagement as part of our UKAA Best Practice Guide inputs, and we've wanted some people, some experts in the sector, to talk about customer engagement and how we approach best practice and what we think best practice is, etc., etc. So just before we kick off in terms of the discussion, I'll ask each of you to introduce yourself with your name, who you work for, what you do, sort of your remit and so forth. And I'm going to start with my left. Russell.
Hi, good morning. I'm Russell Markou. I work for Quintain Living and I'm the head of operations.
Thanks, Russell. Dheraen.
I'm Dheraen Quick. I work for Native Residential and I've been with them for 2.5 years.
Okay, and what's your role?
Community manager, sorry.
That's all right, excellent. Dougie?
Hi, I'm Dougie Orton-Wade. I work for Allsop. I'm an asset manager and look after the build to rent assets in the Northwest.
Excellent, thanks, Dougie. And Rachel? Oh, you're on mute, Rachel. That's £5 fine.
Oh dear, started off slow. Good morning, it's Rachel Hanniquet-Brooking. I'm the head of onboarding and operations nationally for Grainger PLC.
Excellent. And I'm Lesley. I'm president of the UKAA. I also happen to work for Allsop alongside with Dougie and oversee the management lettings company for Allsop. Okay, so today, and for the purposes of this roundtable discussion, let's classify what we mean by customer engagement in build to rent operations. Who do you think is the customer? Who's our customer? Dheraen, why don't you go first?
So I think it's anybody from kind of people within the local community initially, and then working through to kind of, you know, your potential applicants, potential residents, and then sort of like stakeholders, suppliers that you'll use within your community. And then obviously the most obvious and most important being the actual customer who will end up living within the buildings.
Okay, who wants to go next? Russell, what does Quintain think is who does Quintain think is the customer?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, the way we operate in our operating buildings is anyone who enters our building is classified as a customer, right? Or anyone who calls the building inquiry, including the couriers who enter our buildings and have to interact with our team. You know, the experience that they have should be the same as any customer, because effectively they will act as a marketing tool for us. You know, if they leave a building feeling really well looked after and valued as a human being, then what better voice to have, you know, as your marketing. They might have a family member who's looking for a place to live and, you know, basically can promote us based on their experience. So basically everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Rachel, not to is there anybody else for Dougie? Is there anybody else who is the customer in?
Well, of course, in our pet-friendly buildings, we have the dogs and the cats. I think, you know, exactly what Russell was saying. It's anyone who enters into the building, but also starts to interact with our brand whilst they're carrying out their research. You know, that is the customer that we haven't met yet, but is the future customer. So, you know, it's very much future, present, and past. We still, you know, interact with our customers. Yeah,
Dougie, anything to add to that?
Not really. That was exactly what I mean. Those words were what I was going to say. Actually, about the past, the future, and the present. They're all so important. And literally, it is anybody that is related to any of the residents, anybody that walks into the building, friends, families, couriers, as Russell said. Just literally, it could be anybody. So yeah, we're on show. We're on show 24/7. That's what we do. We provide a service. And if you provide a service, you're constantly on show. So anybody.
And to add to that, I guess we haven't mentioned it, but it goes without saying that actually our employees are our customers too, because actually without that, and I always see them as an internal customer, because we've got the people on the front line who are there, you know, as the manifestation of everything that goes on beneath the iceberg, that everything that happens in the accounts, you know, the compliance, all those people that are behind the scenes actually also have a huge impact on how we deliver our service and customer engagement. So why is customer engagement important in build-to-rent operations? I mean, you know, why do we do it?
I think, if I may, with this question, I like this because I think we all know that as an operation, it is at times very challenging, and no day is the same. You know, there's so many different things that happen. And I think that if you are really good at your customer engagement piece, you can pretty much guarantee that your residents or your suppliers will have that trust element with you for when you do have your bad days or when things aren't quite working so well. You know, it builds the trust from them with you, and you'll find that, you know, that they're a lot more understanding, you know, in terms of when you do have those bad days. I think that's probably the biggest thing for me, that I've found. You know, if you do it well, you'll see the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also, we have many reasons why it's so important in all sectors, right? Not just BTR, but ultimately customer engagement leads to loyalty, and which is retention and referrals. Less churn equals less cost. Happy customers equals happy buildings equals revenue growth. Happy staff, you know, I mean, product alone will not drive loyalty. And as long as the team members are supported with the right tools to allow the important processes to happen consistently and allow team members to deliver human interaction, you know, then I think they're the fundamentals. You know, the strong emotional intelligence is absolutely essential in this sector to drive engagement.
Yeah. I agree, and I think it's you know, there's the obvious financial benefits, and as you say about retention and churn and all those things that can have a direct correlation. Actually, also with the not just the resident engagement, that's actually for the staff as well. And I know we mentioned staff earlier, but if the staff are happy, the residents are happy. And actually, when we talk about community in build to rent, we're talking about everybody that's involved with that development. And actually, we're seeing that staff retention is really positive in these developments because they enjoy being part of the community, and the engagement works both ways. So I think it's really important. And actually, what we're seeing from many of the reviews that we've received across the portfolio that we manage is that there's not really a direct correlation between amenity space and the high level of reviews that you're receiving and the high caliber of reviews. 90% of the time comes down to the people or the community.
Yeah, totally.
Which kind of backs up that theory of how important that engagement is.
Yeah, totally. That human interaction is just is primary.
Yes, that's probably been accelerated in terms of its weighting since COVID and the importance of community and interactions and so forth. But Rachel, you know, you said the other day that we've been having big impacts on staff because of illness, and then Dheraen, you just mentioned the whole like customers being a little bit more forgiving when maybe there's some hiccups and so forth. Rachel, you know, the reality of that, how are the trends changing in the sector, do you think, in terms of that customer?
Yeah, I mean, customer engagement, how we position it is building strong relationships. You know, we summarize it very, very shortly. I think in regards to the trends that we're seeing is that the end users or the customers are becoming more expectant, more demanding. I don't like the word demanding because everyone has expectations in their head, but you know, we've got scenarios where you know, sometimes we might need them to understand us, and so if we have sickness, staffing is nationally it's a problem. Recruitment, there's a lot of problems at the moment, and we're finding that if we say to them, well, we've got staff off sick, then they're not willing to understand that we might not be able to give that service. Which, when you are doing your engagement strategy, you know, that's what you've really got to factor in, the expectations.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the customer engagement strategy. How do we scope best practice strategy? Who wants to go first?
I think so. From our perspective, I'm in an interesting position at the moment where I've just kind of moved away from a stabilised asset and now mobilising a new project. So we're obviously looking back at what we did with the previous scheme and trying to improve on that for the new version. And I think for us, it starts with kind of looking at your market intelligence reports, looking at who your actual customers are, you know, the things that they're interested in, the work that they do. And that's kind of the backbone then to set the tone for kind of how your branding is done, the tone of voice that you want to work with, you know, initially. And then I think it's just ensuring that there's a common thread from everything that you do. So whether it's the type of staff that you bring in, you know, the uniforms that they're wearing, the email templates that they receive, the information that comes out of the systems, you know, there has to be a real connection between all of it, because it is all, you know, so important basically. And I think it's just that consistency element for me. I think looking at the customer journey, and rather than just kind of pinpointing the key aspects of it, for me, it needs to be consistent from the very beginning right the way through.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, for us, we're quite different because we started back in 2016 with our first building, and we built the one building, only 141 units, and another one 120. But then everything else, we were lucky to have the capital to deliver everything in one go. So whilst we've got a lot of assets on the ground, you know, the data, you know, which is typically where you start, is looking at the data. But in a growing sector, there isn't a whole lot of quality data out there to reliably inform your strategies. So what we did back then, we would do some, you know, focus groups to get some market research of different, you know, to a broad demographic of renters, coupled with, you know, the insights that we'd gained to date from our current resident survey feedback. But yeah, we're always trying. It's a new sector. We are still, you know, it's not mature enough to really have a proper end-to-end known solution, right? So I think it's just important to be brave to try different things, and to know and accept that you're never going to satisfy everyone. I mean, I think we all can agree that trying to satisfy everyone is just simply not sustainable. So it's finding that sweet spot, which is exciting. You make a few mistakes along the way, but you fail forward. You take those forward, and it helps you inform better going for, you know, for the future strategies. But again, you know, managing resident expectations, going back to the comment on you know, that Rachel was talking about, which completely agree. And I think we all were nodding furiously that customer expectations have gone through the roof. And it'd be great to understand the science behind why, whether it's just pent up demand, I don't know. It could be linked to mental health, but it's in all sectors where the expectations have gone through the roof, and people are less forgiving. So I think how we set out from the beginning, when we started, we ran our first building like a boutique hotel, and it was easy with a, you know, small team, small occupancy or resident base, and we could do those personalized events and so on. And as we suddenly grew, the expectation, you know, was you're going to grow and continue and maintain this, but obviously it's not sustainable. So you have to sort of wind back a bit about your outward messaging to make sure that you're not over promising. And as you're building a brand, you want to sort of promise the world, right? And actually you want to get recognition for that, but in hindsight, perhaps tailor it a bit, you know, tone it down a bit. And actually, ultimately, it's a product that people want. If you get the product right, that draws people in, and then you can focus on how to keep people there through your people.
So there's so many different aspects to that. I mean, it's always, in my experience working for hotels, it's always better to exceed expectations. So set an expectation and then exceed them, and all of a sudden,
yeah,
amazing. Obviously, you have to be able to deliver the benchmark that you set. But okay, so Quintain is you know, you've got a really big site, and obviously you just explained how you went from one building to some multiple buildings and had to sort of temper that as you went. You know, Grainger, also big landlord, but has separate assets and different places versus you know, Native and Allsop, and Dheraen, you have some schemes, but you operate on behalf of investors, yes?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
does the same, single investments for different investor clients. There's kind of like a whole mix there of actually. So let's go of how customer strategy works, because is it by, let's go to Grainger on this one. You know, do you say it's a Grainger brand? I know you've got individual brandings, but for buildings, but is it the Grainger experience, or is it more around, you know, Canning Town Argo's experience? And that pulls, how do you sort of either centralize your customer engagement strategy, or what do you call it, designate it and let each
like empower, yeah.
Like a white label, yeah.
Yes, Rachel, how does Grainger approach that, and what are the differences for you, and essentially why do you do it?
It's a really, really interesting comment, because right now we're in the heart of deciding, because we've got 15 live build to rent sites from north, south, east and west, and we've just entered our new financial year where we have another 5 coming online, and the following year there's more and more. So you're absolutely right, we have separate identities in our buildings, and so in regards to our, you know, scoping or our customer engagement strategy, we actually have to look at the market, our customer, who we're attracting to the building. Just like Russell said, market research is huge. And we've just carried out a lot of interviewing with all of our current customers to get relevant feedback, and then what that will feed into is our overarching customer engagement strategy, so that we give almost like a blueprint, and then we empower at a building level how that's delivered out in that local area that is appropriate, because what we don't want to do is take the autonomy or the personality out of each site by just putting this, you know, canvas. You know, we want it to be down to those individuals that can read, and that's kind of how we're dealing with it. Obviously brand Grainger, and then you have Clippers Quay in Manchester, you've got the Gatehouse in Southampton, so they each have their strategy, and obviously it's not a massive conversation for today, but that's where the placemaking will also come into it.
So essentially you've got your sort of like, you've got your base brand standard, if you like, of Grainger, and that's going to set the tone, and then you've got the nuances of the local environment maybe that actually sort of then take that plan. It's kind of like, I don't want to simplify it, but I was going to use McDonald's, but and I will, because it's just essentially it is such a well-known brand. You know, they have brand standards that are everywhere across the world exactly the same, but isn't it quite exciting when you go to McDonald's that actually might be in a building, it looks different, you go, ooh, surprises on the upside. So in terms of that, so Dougie, I'll come to you. You know, Allsop has different clients. Some have the clients might own different assets and they have a portfolio, but actually, you know, the brand and the brand experience, the customer engagement, how does it change between sort of, how do you manage the different customer engagement strategies, or set them between the different sort of either buildings and or owner profiles, because that's another aspect.
Yeah, it is actually quite an interesting topic, because we've done research recently and how different things can be just a couple of miles down the road. We've got a site in Salford Quays, one in Manchester, completely different demographic. Well, not completely different demographics, but a few years apart when we look at average age. So behaviours are completely different. The expectations are different. The events that we do and roll out are different. And actually, from experience, we only truly understand it once we've allowed the site to mature and stabilize. So we spend the first 6 to 12 months really understanding the demographic in each asset. Each individual site will have its own individuality. I think the running theme and the running thread across all of them is that it's always about belonging. So I think for the customer, for the resident, it's really important that they belong to something, and that something is generally an individual thing, and that's where the community comes into this. So yeah, we've created different brands for different assets, and that does, you know, a lot of that is to do with the fact that we manage for different clients, so we have to do that. But actually I think it's really important to do that as well, because the people that live in these these communities want to feel like they have pride about their own community. So it works really well for build to rent, in my opinion. And yeah, that's how we manage it. But like I say, most importantly for us, it's about, you know, we do set the strategy. There's lots of different phases of the strategy. You've got your pre-let phase, where it's all about marketing, it's all about branding and advertising, digital marketing, social media. Then you've got your lease up phase, where it's a bit of both, because you've got some residents, but you're still leasing up, so you have to do, you know, a mixture of the two. And then you come up to the maturing phase, where then it's all about your social media, it's all about your events, it's all about your on-site engagement, and the digital marketing piece can maybe step backwards. So there's all different phases, but it's all about learning the trends of each one, because each of them can be so different as you go along.
It keeps evolving with the
Yeah.
maturity of the asset, but also might be the maturity of the owner. You know, we talked about Russell, you touched on that, about you started at one point and you kind of, and Rachel, you know, Grainger's going through that. Dheraen, you know, one of the, you know, you operate for different clients. No doubt you have brand standards. How do you maintain consistency in terms of the customer engagement? And you know, if each asset requires something different, how do you kind of scale that, if you like, or ensure it's embedded? Because some of us, and I think that you might be the same, you still have some centralized services. So that bleeds from the centralized services into the sites, can do. How does Native sort of take care of that, or how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so I think similar to Rachel, we're actually in a very similar position where we, you know, going back to kind of the boutique starting point, we were very much in that, you know, in that place. And I actually developed quite a lot of the community kind of customer engagement organically, to be honest, in our first scheme. And then we're now obviously growing and working with a lot of different kind of, you know, operators and investors. But it is really quite an interesting sort of time for us, because we're looking at everything again, we're reviewing that. And as an example, the current kind of owners who we're working with on my scheme now in Woking, they are a council, you know, they are Woking Council ultimately. So for this particular one, they have requested quite a lot of involvement in the branding and the messaging that will come out of that, purely on a much bigger scale in terms of their placemaking initiative. So it is quite different as we look at the different ones, but we're now in the process of streamlining it as much as we can. And again, just going back to kind of that belonging, which you said, Dougie, that's something that I really, really love. You know, I think if we can harness that whole feeling of this is people's home in every sense, then, you know, if we can apply that in every one of our schemes, you know, that's kind of what we're aiming to do. And it's quite a lengthy process, because there are so many aspects of it that you need to consider and try and get some consistency. But I think I really liked what you said, Rachel, about that autonomy, because for me, that is absolutely key. I think the minute you lose that, you start to become a bit fake, and you lose the realness of it. So that's one of the biggest things that, you know, as we're going through this process, we will be really trying our best to keep that autonomy and the personality, because it's what people love.
Yeah, and that is a really interesting sort of dynamic there between, you know, when you scale a business, and so you touched on this, and I'll come back to you, is that how do you what are the challenges, or what is the process that you go through in terms of actually when you want to scale and get consistency, but actually you still want personality, individualism, and the ability to kind of give guidelines, but not, you know, not an introduction by rote. Hello, my name is, welcome to blah, blah. Russell, you know, that must be, you know, you're going through that evolution. What have been some of the key learnings if somebody was looking at this going, okay, I'm going to scale something? What are the pitfalls to look out for, or what maybe more the positives of how you've overcome those things?
Yeah, I mean, we're quite unique, I think, in having a single site and multiple buildings across the estate, all within walking distance. So for us, we've got to get the balance right. Consistency in our case is important. We want the autonomy of the team to shine through, the personalities to shine through, of course, but in order to have the flexibility to have staff efficiencies and allow staff to move from one building to another, it's important that we have processes that are consistent to allow us the flexibility to do that, to cover for holidays, sickness, absence, that sort of thing. So with the business head, you have to have certain guidelines and SOPs, standard operating procedures, which we are continuously evolving and growing and improving. But in terms of, we take it right back to, so for example, we started, as I said, back in 2016 when our building first opened, we had no data on, and customers were basically suspicious. It looked too good to be true. I mean, it was like literally we had comments like, "What's the catch?" That kind of thing. And it was really nice to be in that position because you could really surprise and delight people so easily. But now everything's caught up and it's expected so quickly now. But we start right at the early design stage, and we're working on designs for our next phase of our development in Wembley Park, where we've got another 2,500 units starting to go in the ground early next year. And we consider every component and how this impacts the customer and determining the value each component has on the customer. We are quite unique. Like I said, we've built pretty much all of our assets at the same time. But the pain with that is that during construction of these assets, we didn't have the benefit of hindsight to factor into our designs, because you have to lock stuff down during the contract stages. Otherwise, you get hit with delayed claims and all that sort of stuff. So I think we've done exceptionally well, given that we've had to make decisions in a very immature sector, but to maintain the construction progress. But we've taken into account all of those learnings that we've now got into our next phase, which allows us to harness this feedback from residents to date and consider it into the design. Hence the social spaces being flexible to cater for large events, as well as cater for increasing demand for work from home space outside the home.
So taking that back to the customer engagement strategy, what's changed between what you've been, not so much the product, because obviously that I get that evolution and so forth, but what's changed in the way that you might design processes for customer engagement between then and now? Where's that correlation between process that you've gone on the journey for the product and the service that aligns with the customer engagement piece? How has that modified? How's that been?
Yeah, I mean, as we learn more about our customers, understanding what works and what doesn't, we adapt accordingly. We can set our processes from the outset, but ultimately it's our. Sorry.
Have you changed anything more, like, so you might have centralized something, or then you've actually done more of a devolved, like I'm thinking from an operational point of view, because obviously we all work in operations.
Yeah.
Has there something that's fundamentally shifted that you, I don't know, used to do somebody that, I'm talking about how we resource the teams, or how we, different delivery models.
Yeah.
For a service.
So,
is it on site? Is it remote? Is it in-house?
No. Everything
integrated.
Yeah. So we basically, everything is in-house with us. The only thing that we outsource at the moment is the dirty stuff, should I say, the back of house sort of, the O&M maintenance of our central plant and the cleaners in the communal areas. But we have the same staffing structure in each of our buildings. We have centralized IT and centralized marketing and centralized finance. But other than that, our original structure we've maintained, where you have a resident manager and you have resident associates in each building. The only thing that we are looking at the moment is the tenancy coordination process. Is basically implementing a seasonal tenancy coordinator team to deal with the demand in that peak season, those 3 months, which it's whilst a team on site, going towards the American model where the leasing team do the sales, hand over to the residents team, and then we introduce ourselves, and then we do the whole onboarding, the referencing, and the tenancy progression. I'm very much in favour of that model, because it engages the customer very early on and breaks the tie between the leasing team member and the people who are going to be looking after them throughout their whole life cycle. And it makes that renewal conversation much easier. If you've owned them from the outset, you've welcomed them, you moved them in, you've looked up, you've been their go-to person throughout their experience. So when you come to that renewal conversation, you are effectively, you've earned the right to ask for an uplift, right? And or if you know them that well, which you should do, because they're in your official, like, or unofficial book of business, right? Each team member will have their own sort of go-to, or residents have their own go-to person. You know the pitfalls they've experienced, and you can reflect that in your renewal conversation. But that's the only sort of change we've had at the moment, is that peak season, because obviously you've got hundreds of move-ins. So over a very short period, the team on site need to focus their energy on moving people in, and supported by a dedicated team of tenancy coordination team members.
We've had sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. We've had quite a lot of operational change as we've scaled up, and Grainger has a cluster approach. What we try to do is ensure that we've got clusters, and that gives us more operational efficiencies. And as we have a few sites, we start to introduce roles such as estate operatives, so that we can be more reactive to our customer maintenance requests. We have moved to centralised tenancy progression, so that can service all of our buildings around, so that the customer journey, and it's all online. So we've introduced new software and tech. We also, especially from COVID and stuff, we with the reduced amount of people that were allowed in amenity spaces and gyms and things like that, we've actually kept our booking system in place. Because what we find is that, people are more likely to go and use the space, or they know that they're going to be having a space. So our engagement with the customer, it's more satisfying for them to know that that desk is going to be free for them, or that treadmill's going to be, or there's going to be something available for them. So operationally, we've actually learned quite a bit from this lockdown period. Our next step at the moment, so we have our Leeds building, and I'm sure, like all of you guys, we're just coming off the back of some record-breaking stabilizations. I mean, we talk about customer engagement strategies where we kind of time them to the lease up period. We had a year for Southampton, at least up in 4 months. The headline, we had 9 months, and it's leased up in 2 months. But we're making sure that all of our staff are cross-trained on all of our sites, and introducing the roaming resident service assistants, so that when we do have sickness or we have a particularly busy time. I mean, Clippers Key, I think they had a record. We had 47 move-ins in 1 week the other month, so that we can use our operational efficiencies when we are delivering our customer engagement strategies.
Yeah, and scale is something that's challenging, but also an incredible benefit in build to rent. So that's really helpful insight there. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Russell. So I just want to move on, because you mentioned IT, and Dougie, how does IT and customer engagement kind of mesh? What are the key things that we kind of look out for? What is the best practice in this area in terms of how we use the IT platforms to enhance? I mean, Rachel talked about bookings there. This is more maybe around, there's lots of points we can talk about in terms of the way it's changed, the way that it's catapulted through lockdown. But what does it mean for you as an operator when it comes to the tech platform and how it enhances customer engagement?
Well, I think it's, as you say, the last 18 months through COVID, it's become imperative. We wouldn't have been able to cope without the property management system and being able to communicate so easily and freely with the residents. And it's almost become an expectation. And I know that we talk about communication a lot with service, because arguably it is the most important part of customer service, is the communication. And we have been able to communicate with our communities very, very easily. And keep people updated, keep people feeling like they're, again, belonging to something in very difficult times, which is really, really important. Residents were able to inform us of people that needed to come to their apartments if they had a COVID case, for instance, they had shopping delivered, all that kind of thing. But a very an interesting one for me is that where we've seen the bulletin board, where we use as like almost like the Facebook group page of each community. The postings on there had increased over 100% year on year, and it just shows how much people have needed that interaction with people in their community. And it also allowed us to also jump in there as a team on site. We were also able to see if there was certain trends appearing on these bulletin boards, there was things that people needed help with that we might be able to help and assist with. So it allowed us to almost watch from afar without physically being anywhere near any of the residents. So that was really important. The maintenance reporting, the parcel, as we've discussed, parcels are just going crazy, and that's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. These developments are getting over 20,000 parcels a year, and we log every single one of those as part of the service, but also from the security perspective, and also to grab data and use it. And that's leads me on nicely to data, and it's very important for us to have the IT systems. IT, in my opinion, will never replace human interaction, and engagement's always predominantly through human interaction, but we have to have the IT systems so that we can collect the data to help us shape our service moving forwards. And I mean things like maintenance requests. If we can see exactly when a maintenance request is being logged, what time it is, what day of the week it is, what category it's in, we then therefore can make our engagement and our service better moving forwards, because we can see those trends and those patterns and plan with them. So yeah, for me, the IT systems are just almost, it goes without saying now that you need that to succeed in what we do. So it's paramount.
Thanks, Dougie. So Dheraen, in terms of that IT platform, or what are sort of, is there a best practice sort of either usage or way in which IT platforms are, or the technology more broadly, helps with your customer engagement strategy?
Yeah, so we apologies. We use RealPage, so it's obviously quite well known within the American market, and we went through a process with them to essentially customize it to the UK workflow of community management. So that's everything from your, property management elements to it, from your leasing application flow, everything's within that. So it's really robust now for what we need from it. And there's obviously a lot more advancement that it can give us as well. What I would say with what you were talking about, Dougie, especially with COVID, we were really fortunate to have launched our resident app at that point, which is very similar to what you were mentioning about kind of a social media platform. But it's got so many different elements to it. Like, I created interest groups in there for people to kind of meet with one another digitally during COVID. So it's kind of thinking, the analogy I like to use is kind of old school meets new school, because these interest groups and things like that, we don't really do any of that in person anymore. We just don't. You don't go up to somebody and talk about books, for example, but on the app, it just gives people, just an extra layer ultimately to really make the most of the community. They don't need to really do anything with it. They just join the groups and there they go. They've got book lovers, so it's looking at, with the app, it was traditionally created for like your maintenance requests and your parcel management, but looking at the additional layer to that. So how can we use it as an engagement piece? How can we, especially with COVID, communicate through that without any contact being needed? It was really quite important for us. So we now use it in more of a targeted way. So we have KPIs for our team to make sure that the actual engagement from customers is really high on there, because from an efficiency perspective, if you've got really high engagement on the app, although you still need that old school, the people element and picking up the phone, I really believe that that's still as important. But more and more now, people just want live, they want live information. They want to be able to chat with you yesterday. They want answers from you now. They want, they want it all there, right on their phone. They want to get a response, there and then. And that's the biggest trend I've seen since we've implemented the tech. Is it's great to have it, but you've got to have the team, you've got to have the right number of people using it within your team to make sure it's sufficient for what it's for, if that makes sense. Because people want, like you say, the demand is crazy, and people they think it's like Amazon. They want you to be there 24/7. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Lesley, but that's probably the biggest thing for us is the app and the engagement.
Yeah, that's all you want to say something?
Yeah, definitely on this. I mean, to your point about people's expectations, so what we've learned is, yes, we launched our app during COVID, and so one of the things on there, you can report all your maintenance cases, but what we need to get really smart at is something that's being worked on at the moment, is whilst it sends an auto response acknowledging it, which is great because people, if they get an instant response, they wonder if it's landed or it's been seen, so you take away that anxiety. But what we need to make it even more dynamic, so that depending on what case you raise, will deliver a message back which is linked to how long it's going to take for the team, if it was a P1 or a P5, P1 being 2 or 3 hours if it's life threatening or building threatening or whatever, so that you manage their expectations. And what that does feed into the team, the maintenance team's SLA. And one thing I didn't mention before, Lesley, is that one of the things we have changed is we've insourced the maintenance team now, so we have our own in-house head of FM and maintenance team, which is great. It's a game changer. Because they're staff, they are on our books, they have access to our whole CRM and the whole GDPR aspect around that. So yeah, managing expectations is really important. But what we found with the app as well is that it's been superb in terms of the facilitating resident-owned created social groups, like the book clubs you mentioned. Interestingly, I don't know about you guys, but one of the most popular groups that are on there is the buy swap sell group. It drives huge engagement. We're seeing residents communicating, running across the estate to buy or swap or sell stuff to each other. It's amazing. It's so good. And off the back of that, it's creating relationships. And even like football and tennis groups, because we have both facilities on the site, five-a-side football and tennis and what have you. They're confident just to go and ask anyone up for this, and you see the groups evolving. It's been some great and take ups on that. And also what we're looking at as well is what we're finding is, with the apartment familiarization, so on the app you can book your own apartment familiarization with a member of the team. So get in, settle in, and when you're ready, we'll come and show you within a certain hours of the day of the week. We show you your apartment, we show you your building. So you don't want to do it on the day of moving, because they're not taking it in. So you want time to drive down more sort of email queries and so on. So we're looking at doing video content as well on the app. So how-to guides, simple, how to set up your thermostat, and that'll be members of the team. It might even be our CEO. Hi, I'm James Saunders. I'm here today. I'm the CEO of Quintain, and I'm here to show you how to set up your thermostat. And that stuff, it's very agile. You can just add to it really quickly. So that's coming very, very soon. But also, as you say, you get an insight into what people are saying between the communities as well. And because often you see speculation, people, because I know that we love engagement, we love physical interaction, it's so important, but they have to be mindful that there are people who just don't want to interact, and that's where the app comes. It's so essential, that quick response, and we have to take that into account. But at least those people who don't want to interact, you see someone saying something and someone saying something else, and then the speculation increases and they're making assumptions which are wrong. So it's nice to be able to step in, and not even step in, but send comms out to reflect those sort of conversations to sort of quash any concern. But great, honestly, and they're setting up their own groups now, which is fantastic. So
that ability to read the tone and respond accordingly and adapt to your customer engagement and messaging is essential. We've got so many things that we could go down. I mean, we haven't got onto pets and ESG and all those sorts of things, but we're going to run out of time because we're going to finish shortly. But I want to talk, how do we measure customer engagement success? We say best practice, that's what we're all aiming for. That's what we're hoping to come through into all of our customers and customer bases. How do we measure it? What's considered not just good, but who wants to go? How do you measure this?
I think from my perspective, it's your renewal rate, first of all. That's the big, I guess, target really. But then from a more qualitative perspective, I think it's your survey reviews and your home views reviews, for example, because you know, if you do it well, you can really gauge that on there. You can see exactly who your best team members are, which methods of communication work well. You know, people will tell you the detail. And then I think it's, you know, going back to what we were talking about, who is the customer, it's the staff retention as well, because they feel like they know what's expected of them. They feel like they can be personable in their role. And if the sites are successful through how they're engaging, then that reflects well on them and they want to stay within the company and within the team. And then, you know, I guess probably not so fun, but in terms of the complaints and the number of complaints that you have at site level, I think that's also a reflection of the customer engagement as a whole. And if you can minimise them, or, you know, they're not necessarily relating to the communication, then you're doing a good job, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have similar kind of ideals in regards to retention, both staff and resident. We also look at tenancy length, occupation. I think that's a real key driver of measuring it. And then renewals, like you said. But also what we look at is where are leads coming from? You know, is it portal driven or is it word of mouth driven? Because the more word of mouth or refer a friend, because we have a refer a friend scheme at Grainger, you know, if we start to see the trend that people are recommending us or moving friends in, then again, that's a really good measure of how our engagement strategy is delivering.
Dougie?
Yeah, all of the same kind of things really. You can look at a bit of everything. You've got renewals, you've got growth in there, you've got tenancy length. That you can review all of these different parts, and I suppose they're all just as important as each other. For me, it's very important of how, and you mentioned staff retention, how happy the team are. That really shows how well you're engaging. So yeah, there's all, like I say, there's just a bit of each of the ones we've already mentioned, really.
So, Russell, is there anything you wanted to add to that specific point?
I think the key one is you know, also event attendance and also, renewals is one of our big ones. And again, the length of renewals is seeing an increase versus their previous tenancy, because like we have this 3-year deal at the moment. That's really exciting to see that change. So your average lease length is growing significantly on renewal specifically, which is a really good indicator. We also, you know, survey our residents using Net Promoter Score, so 2 weeks after move in, midterm, and then 2 weeks after move out, and just seeing the trends, you know, of those over week on week, month on month, year on year, is also a good indicator. It's specifically around about the engagement and people wanting to fill in those surveys is key for us. So like 23% take up on move-in survey, then it sort of drops down as the midterm, and then even less on the departure one. So because we do it 2 weeks after move out, so we kind of forgotten a bit. So, but yeah, looking at all that data is what gives us good indications on how successful we are or are not.
I was going to say as well, one other thing on the data is if you know, with all of these apps that we have now, they're very good at telling you what's happening. They're very good at telling you the trends and how many people are using these apps, and where the hot periods are, and whether you've had a dip or you've had an increase. So again, going back to the IT, this is another, you know, it's a really good tool to find out how your engagement is going.
That's true, actually. That's the measure we use, actually, Dougie, is spot on. And also, I don't know if you guys do monthly newsletters and stuff like that, and seeing what the click rate is and open rate and all that stuff. That's another good indicator.
Yeah, yes. And you know, all of this data in a perfect world, and hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to actually start tracking in a consistent way to share with our, you know, our clients and investors, so they can kind of see how this sort of customer engagement success correlates to, you know, returns, and that, you know, that's ultimately what they're interested in, amongst other things. But so last question before we kind of wrap up a bit. Well, no, 2 last questions. So what are the differences, if any, in best practice customer engagement delivery and function? We've talked about urban because I know for the most part, your portfolios. Grainger, I know you've got some wider suburban build to rent. What are the differences when we're talking about best practice customer engagement delivery and function? Is there any difference between urban and suburban?
For me, I can't really comment too much on suburban build to rent, being a hardcore urban build to rent operator.
Hardcore.
I suppose, yeah, I suppose my thoughts are, how to facilitate in-person events on any scale, presumably with a community hall. But otherwise, I could see an app working really well for the reporting of maintenance issues, additional service provider partners for gardening, window cleaning, handy person services, etc. And of course, virtual events would be a great catalyst to building community there, where residents would no doubt recognise each other when they're passing in a street from the last event. Yeah, I think probably what else would suburban build to rent would benefit from this would be maybe less crime and social behaviour, because it's more of a, I don't know, open community, but even though it's virtual.
Dougie, you've got experience. We have a big portfolio of suburban build.
Yeah, we do, and actually it's the same. Nothing changes apart from the obvious, as Russell mentioned. If we haven't got a residence lounge in a housing estate, or or a gym or whatever it may be, then we can't do physical events. But we can. There's always options. We've got things. We've got Zoom. We've got Teams. We can do virtual events now. But the engagement piece is the delivery should be the same, in my opinion, and that's how we deliver it across our portfolio, is that the engagement and that responsiveness and collectiveness, it all remains the same. So
yeah, we have our Wellesley and Bearwood, so Hampshire, and that's really exciting. It's acres and acres of land. There's single housing, multi-family housing, flats, and it's interesting because I think where it differs is the service. So we don't have the amenity space, but we do have a big hall. So we don't offer those parcel facilities. But also talking about what we were talking about earlier, is the difference here is that the maintenance requests go to a centralised desk rather than being dealt with on site, because they're so varied. But otherwise, you're absolutely right. Nothing else changes. It's just how we service and what services that we offer.
So the standards are the same in terms of consistency, being authentic. There's common thread, but actually just the amount of service that you might provide. You don't need parcel lockers if you've got essentially some front doors with parcel attainments at them.
Don't get me started on parcel lockers.
Well, on that, well, last topic we'll round up with, is really around what trends we're seeing in customer service and in customer engagement more broadly in the sector. I mean, we know the parcels, that's quite a big thing. Responsiveness, expectations, we started the topic on that. And my belief is that because we have now had access to a lot more immediacy of delivery through things like Amazon, those logistics have become so quick and smooth now. The tech platforms are so quick and smooth now, and our want and expectation for delivery of things that we can get immediately, plug and play, is so smooth that that's creating the benchmark, really. And actually the challenges with property management, and I mean, I know we're talking about customer engagement, but a lot of those issues that we're talking about in terms of illness and interruption of service comes back down to the functions that we provide for these buildings and the necessity of maybe prioritizing the building function versus a parcel delivery. That's ultimately the challenge. We face challenges that maybe other sectors don't. So what are we seeing out in the customer engagement, maybe not so much the service, but what's that people are more excited to be engaged, they're more reserved to be engaged with their resident base? I'm thinking more around our communities.
I think for me, it's they're definitely, since COVID, a lot more keen to be engaged, for sure. And I think the one thing that I learned from that period was the transparency expectation is the latest thing. So I was quite taken back when obviously we went into COVID and, you know, we had to close amenity. I'm sure you guys did too. And the staff go on to furlough. And I think I had a kind of level of information that I was happy to share with the residents, as we all are. But I think they get so involved in the community aspect that sometimes it's, you feel so answerable to them, you know, to the point where they want to know exactly which staff member's gone on to furlough and for how long they've gone on to furlough for and when they're coming back. And it's, in a way, it's great because it means they're so engaged. But I think it was quite an adjustment for me to be, I was taken back, like, wow, they really care about every single element of it. So I think transparency is definitely huge. And when you have on-site teams, I think it's even more important because, you know, you can see everything on the app and you can, you know, you've got access to the emails that come through, but they will just come down and speak to you if they don't hear back from you within the time frame they want, and they need the information and it has to be transparent. I think that's definitely a learning from COVID. They've become so connected to everything to do with the community that ultimately as a team, there's no hiding really. You've got to be transparent consistently, you know, you've got to, yeah.
People like that. Yeah. I was going to say, Lesley, people, our residents love the fact that we can show that we're human, and that when we make mistakes, we drop the ball. And we entered a COVID, certainly was a new experience for everyone. So, you know, we were learning along the way. But yeah, I think going back to what Dheraen was saying, your name is so difficult to say. It is about that immediacy that people are expecting, and they do come down. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about emotional intelligence. We are in people's homes. They see they're paying for these people. You know, you get that quote, I'm paying your salaries occasionally, but generally the relationships are so strong there that that's quite heartwarming. But you need to also keep a professional distance, because you never know when those difficult conversations are going to come up and someone's in arrears, and if you've got too close a relationship, you know, that can prove difficult. But yeah, expectations we're seeing across all sectors are just through the roof, as mentioned before. But in terms of other changes or other trends, the online tools, I don't know about you guys, but we implemented full virtual tours allowing end-to-end leasing, and that's been super helpful. And people who are so remote can get to see the product in so much detail, enough so that they are confident and, you know, best in renting with us, you know, without even seeing the product, which has been fantastic as well.
Rachel, what would you say the trends are that we're seeing in the customer engagement? Anything's changed? Or
Yeah, I mean, people are coming out, aren't they? I you know, if I do another quiz on Zoom, I'll scream. Never again. So people are coming out. The trend is that they want to be entertained, but they want to be entertained in person. So I think socially wise, it's a great time. We didn't furlough any of our staff over COVID, so it's actually nice to see the staff growing and interacting more as well, which has been really great. But, you know, trend wise, I'm afraid it's always going to stay service led. And we have so many battles at the moment, whether it's Brexit, COVID, you know, with shortage of maintenance staff and expectations from residents on wanting things, like you said, Lesley, you know, they want it now. And so what we've got to focus on, these expectations. I think that's the biggest thing.
Managing expectations, in my experience, also comes down to communication, but it is tough. I totally get it. Okay, Dougie, what about you? What I think there was talked about transparency there.
Yeah, just to echo really the human interaction, we were quite worried when we started to sort of reintroduce live events on site, and wondering how that would go down. Actually, the numbers we're seeing now are far higher than what we saw pre-COVID. So actually, it's really helped because, as you say, people want to get out and people want to interact. Where that does bring a challenge is that people just want to talk. So our residents are just wanting some human interaction and have been wanting to speak to our teams, rightly so, which could take an hour of one of your team away from your operation. So it's trying to balance all of that and to manage the human interaction with your IT and with your app. But yeah, it's just been really nice to see that people do want to interact and want it more than ever. So it just allows us to do what we do best and actually go and, you know, be build to rent.
Dougie, what events are you seeing are successful? Is there any change from pre-COVID, or are you seeing?
Not particularly, no. So just generally the sort of social gatherings, the as always, the food and drink events, anything with food and drink, it goes a long way. But all of the events in general, the personal training events, the well-being events, yoga, everything is increased in terms of interest and numbers.
But those ones in attendance, though, if you're seeing an increase, how do you cater for that in terms of, because we've filled our buildings over a period of lockdown, and you know we're now entering back into our in-person events, and it's how you manage the numbers without disappointing others is what we're going to struggle with now. I think, you know, it's worth considering.
You just need a bigger roof terrace each time.
Well, I wish, but you know, our roof terraces are limited to 60 because you've only got one fire core, you know, and all these sort of little nuances, and you've got a building of 743 apartments. So when you try to explain that.
Maybe you could put it on the big screen at Wembley.
Yeah.
Let me make a note of that.
Right. On that note, I said we're going to finish within the hour. So that has been really stimulating. And I think there's a lot of learnings there about, you know, some really best practice around what we're seeing in the market. I thank you so much for joining. And I think we'll have some more sessions about this, and we'll cover some other topics. So take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks
you.
for having
Thank
us.
you.
Bye.
Bye.